Welcome to the Dark History Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Carter. Deep within the labyrinthine avenues of geopolitics and secret operations, the term black site emerges. Shrouded in controversy and secrecy, these clandestine locations have become synonymous with a dark side of American foreign policy, an uncomfortable truth that challenges the nation's self-image as a beacon of human rights. Operating beyond the scrutiny of the public and even the judicial system, black sites are secret prisons used by the United States during the War on Terror. They are unacknowledged, undisclosed, and undeniably part of a complex web of international intrigue. As a stark departure from the traditional rule of law, these facilities have been used to detain and interrogate individuals deemed threats to national security, often employing methods that veer into the realm of torture. The inception of this network of black sites can be traced back to the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. The Bush administration, under a shroud of fear and urgency, responded with a global campaign against al-Qaeda. It was within this context that the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, was granted unprecedented leeway to capture and detain suspects at secret locations around the world. Beneath the radar of international law, these sites became the setting for a grim tableau of human rights abuses. Detainees were subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques, a euphemism for practices that included waterboarding, sensory deprivation, and stress positions. These methods, condemned internationally as torture, were justified under the guise of imminent threat and the necessity of extracting information. The existence of these sites was kept under wraps, with information trickling out mainly through investigative journalism and the testimonies of former detainees. The secrecy surrounding these facilities effectively shielded them from the public eye and the reach of international law, creating an unprecedented legal and ethical vacuum. Unsurprisingly, the revelation of these sites and their practices caused a global outcry. Critics argued that the use of torture not only violated international law but was also ineffective in extracting reliable information. The argument was clear. Cruelty is not only morally repugnant, but it also breeds resentment and radicalization, potentially fueling the very terror it aims to combat. The story of America's global interrogation network is a complex and unsettling narrative that exposes the stark realities of power, fear, and the lengths to which a nation will go to ensure its security. It's a tale that, as we shall see, continues to cast a long and troubling shadow over the national and international landscape. Delving deeper into the abyss that is America's global interrogation network, we find that the black sites were not confined to one specific region. Instead, they were dispersed across continents, strategically located in countries like Thailand, Poland, and Afghanistan. The breadth and depth of this network is a chilling testament to the extent of this clandestine operation. Each site was carefully chosen to benefit from the host country's strategic location, political situation, or legal loopholes. For instance, Afghanistan, the epicenter of America's war on terror, was home to several black sites, including the infamous Salt Pit. Here, detainees were subjected to extreme cold, extended isolation, and brutal physical abuse. In Eastern Europe, the CIA operated a high-security prison in a remote part of Poland. Detainees there were subjected to some of the harshest interrogation tactics, including waterboarding. The Polish government, now mired in controversy, initially denied any involvement or knowledge of the site, highlighting the intricate web of deniability woven to protect these operations. Meanwhile, in Thailand, a black site codenamed Cat's Eye was established. It was here that the first enhanced interrogation techniques were developed, which later became the blueprint for the treatment of detainees across the network. The presence of these sites in such diverse locations meant that the operation was not confined to the geographical boundaries of the United States. This international reach allowed the CIA to operate beyond the scrutiny of American courts and the prying eyes of the media. Yet, despite the secrecy and geographical distance, the black sites were not entirely immune from detection. Over time, a mosaic of evidence began to emerge, pieced together by journalists, human rights activists, and the testimonies of those who had been held within their walls. This evidence painted a grim picture of a system operating in complete disregard for the fundamental principles of human rights and rule of law. The existence of these sites also raised pertinent questions about the complicity and involvement of host nations. The murky relationships between the CIA and these countries were shrouded in layers of secrecy, with governments either denying their knowledge or complicity in the operations. In this context, the Global Interrogation Network not only exposed the extremes of America's war on terror, but also revealed a complex matrix of international complicity that facilitated and shielded these operations from scrutiny. The question that arises is, how did such a system maintain its secrecy, and what mechanisms were in place to hold it accountable? As we delve further into this narrative, we confront the chilling reality of a system designed to evade oversight and operate in the shadows. At the heart of this covert network was a complex power structure, intertwined with key figures who played pivotal roles in its creation and operation. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, an independent U.S. government agency, was the primary orchestrator of these black sites. The agency was granted unprecedented autonomy post 9/11, with the mandate to prevent further terrorist attacks on American soil. This mandate, coupled with an atmosphere of fear and urgency, allowed for the creation of an operation that, in many ways, functioned above the law. The Director of Central Intelligence, DCI at the time, George Tenet, was instrumental in the establishment of this network. Tenet, who served under both President Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, advocated for an aggressive, proactive approach to national security threats. He championed the establishment of these covert detention centers to facilitate aggressive interrogation techniques, often bypassing other intelligence agencies and the traditional channels of oversight. James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, two former Air Force psychologists, also played a significant role. Hired by the CIA, they developed and implemented the enhanced interrogation techniques. Their methods, heavily criticized for their brutality and ineffectiveness, formed the backbone of the program. The Justice Department, under the leadership of Attorney General John Ashcroft, provided the legal justification for the extreme interrogation techniques. The department's Office of Legal Counsel authored a series of memos known as the torture memos. These documents, written by lawyers John Yoo and Jay Bybee, argued that techniques such as waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and sensory overload did not constitute torture under U.S. and international law. These key figures, along with countless others operating behind the scenes, created a system that existed outside the conventional boundaries of law and morality. The black sites, under the guise of national security, functioned without effective oversight, allowing the violation of human rights to go unchecked. This lack of accountability, coupled with a culture of secrecy, allowed the Global Interrogation Network to operate in the shadows for years. Yet, as we will discover, this network was not a monolith. It was a complex, multifaceted operation that evolved over time, influenced by a multitude of factors. As the war on terror continued, so too did the evolution of these black sites and the tactics employed within them. This evolution, driven by necessity and opportunity, would further blur the lines between legality and illegality, morality and immorality. The establishment of the black sites was a clandestine operation, shrouded in secrecy from its inception. Yet, the very nature of their existence eventually led to their exposure. The veil of secrecy began to lift in 2004, when the Washington Post published an investigative report by Dana Priest. In her report, Priest shed light on the network of secret prisons, revealing their existence to the public for the first time. Priest's report was a watershed moment in the history of the black sites. It was the first time the American public and the world at large became aware of these secret detention centers and the harsh interrogation techniques being used within their walls. The impact was immediate and profound. The revelation sparked public outrage and ignited a national and international debate about the legality and morality of the program. This public revelation, however, did not signal the end of the black sites. Instead, it marked a new phase in their evolution. Faced with public scrutiny, the CIA and the Bush administration began to adapt their strategies. They sought to legitimize the program in the eyes of the public, while still maintaining its covert nature. One such adaptation was the establishment of a legal framework to justify the existence of the black sites and the techniques used within them. The Bush administration argued that these detainees were enemy combatants, not prisoners of war, and were therefore not subject to the Geneva Conventions. This reclassification allowed them to argue that the enhanced interrogation techniques did not constitute torture. In parallel with these legal maneuvers, the CIA also began to refine its interrogation methods. The agency sought to make the techniques more palatable to the public while still maintaining their aggressive nature. This led to the introduction of softening up techniques such as sensory deprivation and psychological manipulation, which were seen as less brutal than physical torture. However, despite these adaptations, the controversy surrounding the black sites did not dissipate. Instead, it continued to grow. Reports of detainee abuse and the lack of due process rights for detainees added fuel to the fire. Human rights groups and legal scholars continued to challenge the legality and morality of the program, leading to a series of legal battles that would eventually reach the Supreme Court. This period of adaptation and controversy marked a significant turning point in the history of the black sites. It highlighted the tension between national security and human rights, between secrecy and transparency. The black sites, once a secret tool in the war on terror, had become a public symbol of this tension. This symbol, as we will see, would continue to shape the course of the black sites and the broader war on terror. As the black sites entered this new phase, the techniques used within them began to escalate, crossing lines that many would argue should never have been crossed. It's important to comprehend that these were not isolated incidents of abuse, but rather a systematic approach sanctioned at the highest levels of government. The use of waterboarding, a method that simulates drowning, became commonplace. This technique had been classified as a war crime by the United States after World War II, yet it was now being employed by the CIA in these secret locations. Other methods were equally chilling. In one technique known as walling, detainees were slammed against a flexible, false wall, designed to create a loud noise and instill fear. In another, detainees were subjected to stress positions, forced to stand, sit, or kneel in uncomfortable positions for extended periods of time. Many were subjected to sleep deprivation, sometimes kept awake for up to 180 hours, often standing or in stress positions. In a few documented cases, detainees were subjected to mock executions, a clear violation of international law. In one instance, a gun was fired in a room adjacent to a detainee to make him believe another prisoner had been executed. Yet perhaps the most horrifying of all the techniques was the use of rectal rehydration or rectal feeding, a medically unnecessary and painful procedure that involved the insertion of a tube into the detainee's rectum. This procedure was used as a method of control rather than for any legitimate medical purpose. These practices were not sporadic or the result of rogue agents, but were instead part and parcel of the enhanced interrogation program. They were approved at the highest levels of the CIA and were seen as essential tools in the war on terror. The brutality of these techniques was matched only by their ineffectiveness. Many of the detainees subjected to these methods provided false or misleading information, leading the CIA on wild goose chases and diverting resources away from legitimate threats. Yet the use of these techniques continued, propped up by a legal and political framework that argued they were necessary for national security. The escalation in brutality was not without consequence. It led to the death of at least one detainee and left many others physically and psychologically scarred. The legacy of these tactics still haunts those who were subjected to them, and the scars they left on America's moral standing are still visible to this day. In the face of these brutal techniques, resistance was inevitable. Yet those who dared to defy their tormentors often found themselves subjected to even more severe punishments, their defiance viewed as further proof of their guilt. But amid the brutality, some detainees found strength in silence, refusing to give their captors the satisfaction of a response, no matter how much they were made to suffer. This silence wasn't a sign of guilt or compliance, but a form of resistance, a way to maintain some semblance of dignity in an environment designed to strip them of it. This silence was deafening, a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty. However, silence was not always an option. Some detainees were subjected to a technique known as white noise, a constant, low-level background noise designed to break down mental resistance and induce a state of helplessness. This was a psychological torture, designed not to extract information, but to break the will and spirit of the detainees. This relentless onslaught of physical and psychological torture was not without its consequences. Many detainees were left with permanent physical and psychological scars, their lives forever altered by their experiences. Yet despite the unimaginable horrors they endured, many stood firm, refusing to give their capturers the satisfaction of a confession, no matter how much they were made to suffer. The use of these techniques also had another, perhaps unintended consequence. It hardened the resolve of many detainees, transforming them from mere suspects into committed enemies of the state. This was a self-fulfilling prophecy, the brutal treatment of detainees creating the very enemies it was designed to combat. Yet despite the obvious moral and practical failings of these techniques, their use continued, justified by a narrative that painted them as necessary evils in the war on terror. This narrative was bolstered by a legal framework that deemed these techniques legal under certain circumstances, a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for America's moral standing in the world. The use of these techniques did not just tarnish America's image abroad, it also left deep scars at home. It created a divide within the intelligence community, with many agents deeply uncomfortable with the tactics they were ordered to use. This internal conflict would eventually lead to leaks and whistleblowers, exposing the existence of black sites and the brutal techniques employed within them to the world. As the use of black sites and torture tactics persisted, a few brave individuals within the intelligence community began to dissent, raising questions about the legality and morality of such methods. This simmering unease grew into full-blown alarm, prompting what would become a pivotal moment in the history of America's global interrogation network. The first major revelation came in 2004, when photographs of prisoner abuse at Abu Ghraib, a U.S.-run detention facility in Iraq, were leaked to the media. The images were horrifying, depicting scenes of detainees being subjected to physical and psychological abuse by U.S. personnel. The backlash was immediate and severe, sparking global outrage and severely damaging the U.S.'s reputation. This was followed by further leaks, each more damning than the last. In 2005, The Washington Post published a report revealing the existence of secret CIA prisons in Eastern Europe. The article, based on information from anonymous sources within the intelligence community, detailed how these black sites were used to detain terrorism suspects and carry out harsh interrogation tactics. These revelations forced the issue of America's global interrogation network into the public domain, sparking a nationwide debate about the use of torture and the country's commitment to human rights. The leaks also led to calls for greater transparency and accountability within the intelligence community. However, these calls were met with resistance from those who believed that such measures would compromise national security. In 2006, a landmark Supreme Court ruling deemed the use of military commissions to try detainees at Guantanamo Bay unlawful. This ruling challenged the legal framework that had been used to justify the use of torture and black sites. But rather than leading to a halt in these practices, it seemed to spur the government into finding new ways to continue them. The revelations continued. In 2009, the Senate Intelligence Committee launched an investigation into the CIA's detention and interrogation program. After years of inquiry and analysis, the committee released a declassified summary of its report in 2014. The report was damning, detailing the gruesome techniques used on detainees and concluding that the CIA's methods were not effective in gathering intelligence. The report also revealed that the CIA had misled Congress and the public about the extent and effectiveness of its interrogation program. This deception only added to the sense of betrayal felt by many Americans, further eroding trust in the intelligence community. Through the courage of whistleblowers and the diligence of investigative journalists, the world was finally getting a glimpse into the dark corners of America's global interrogation network. Yet with each revelation, the complex web of justifications, legalities, and moral quandaries only seemed to thicken. The debate raged on, the question of how to balance national security with human rights remaining as contentious as ever. In the aftermath of these revelations, the question of justice became increasingly urgent. Numerous human rights groups and legal experts argued that those responsible for the authorization and execution of torture must be held accountable. Advocates for accountability ranged from those calling for criminal prosecutions of high-ranking officials to others who simply sought a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a formal apology. But the path to justice was far from straightforward. In the United States, the principle of prosecutorial discretion allows the government to decide whether to bring criminal charges in a particular case. This discretion is typically exercised by the Department of Justice, an institution that had been deeply involved in the legal justifications for torture and black sites. As such, it was seen by many as unlikely that the department would willingly initiate prosecutions against its own. Meanwhile, the international community grappled with its own response. The United Nations Convention Against Torture, to which the United States is a party, obligates countries to prosecute or extradite individuals suspected of committing acts of torture. But the mechanisms for enforcing this obligation are weak, and the international community has rarely shown the political will to take action against powerful nations. In the end, the Obama administration chose a path of looking forward, not backward. Despite acknowledging that we tortured some folks, President Obama resisted calls for criminal investigations. Instead, he issued an executive order banning the use of torture, effectively closing the book on the era of black sites. This decision was met with considerable controversy. Critics argued that without accountability, there can be no deterrence against future abuses. Supporters, on the other hand, claimed that pursuing prosecutions would only further polarize a nation already divided over the issue of torture. The debate over accountability continues to this day, with no clear resolution in sight. The story of America's global interrogation network is a painful reminder of the tension between security and human rights, a tension that is not easily reconciled. But perhaps the most important lesson to be gleaned from this saga is the need for vigilance. For in the shadows of secrecy, power can all too easily morph into abuse, and it is only through the light of transparency and accountability that we, as a society, can hope to prevent such abuses from happening again. The legacy of the black sites and their controversial interrogation tactics undeniably cast a long shadow over America's human rights record. It was a period in American history where the scales tipped heavily towards national security, often at the expense of the very principles the United States was founded upon. The impact can be felt in many ways, both tangible and intangible. On a tangible level, the use of black sites and torture tactics has arguably damaged the nation's reputation worldwide. It has been cited as a recruiting tool for terrorists and used as propaganda against the West. It has strained relationships with allies and provided ammunition to enemies. The fallout is substantial and far-reaching, and it's a stain on America's global image that is not easily erased. On an intangible level, the issue has changed the way many Americans view their government. It exposed a darker side of the state apparatus, one that operates in the shadows and bends the rules to its will. Many citizens grapple with the dissonance between their nation's actions and the values it purports to uphold. This has led to a deep-seated mistrust and cynicism that persist to this day. The legacy of the black sites also manifests in the ongoing legal challenges faced by detainees still held at Guantanamo Bay, the most well-known of these clandestine sites. Despite President Obama's executive order, the facility remains open, and the legal status of its detainees is mired in complexity and controversy. Some detainees have been held for over a decade without trial, and their prolonged detention continues to raise questions about the rule of law and the respect for human rights. In the realm of policy, the legacy of the black sites era continues to shape the discourse on national security and counterterrorism tactics. The debate over the use of enhanced interrogation techniques is far from over. Some argue that such methods are necessary in the face of grave threats, while others contend that they are ineffective and counterproductive, in addition to being morally reprehensible. Finally, the legacy of black sites is a stark reminder of the potential for unchecked power to lead to abuse. It underscores the importance of oversight, transparency, and accountability in government actions, particularly in matters of national security. The lessons learned from this dark chapter in American history must serve as a guide for future conduct, a warning of the perils of compromising principles for perceived security. Indeed, the legacy of America's global interrogation network is complex and multifaceted. It is a story of power and abuse, of fear and security, and of the delicate balance between protecting a nation and upholding its values. As such, it is a story that continues to resonate, serving as a cautionary tale for the present and the future. And yet, despite the revelations and the ensuing public outcry, there are still many unanswered questions that linger. The extent of the black site's operations remains largely unknown, with only a fraction of the alleged sites having been identified and verified. The exact number of detainees held in these facilities and the nature of their treatment are also shrouded in secrecy. And while some have been held accountable for the abuses that occurred, there is a pervasive sense that many more have escaped justice. Moreover, the question of why and how such a system could have been established and maintained continues to haunt the American consciousness. How did the fear and urgency of the post-9/11 era allow for such a drastic deviation from the nation's principles? How could the checks and balances designed to prevent such abuses fail so spectacularly? These questions demand introspection, not just from the government and the agencies involved, but also from the public that, in some ways, was complicit in its silence and acquiescence. The issue of black sites and enhanced interrogation techniques also compels a re-evaluation of the way America confronts its enemies. It challenges the ethos that the ends justify the means and raises questions about the true cost of security. Is it measured solely in lives saved and attacks thwarted? Or should it also take into account the erosion of moral authority, the damage to international standing, and the violation of human rights? Finally, the legacy of the black sites raises the question of remembrance and reckoning. How does a nation come to terms with this dark chapter in its history? How does it ensure that the lessons are not forgotten, that the abuses are not repeated? These are difficult questions with no easy answers. One thing, however, is clear. The story of America's global interrogation network is a stark reminder of the dangerous intersection of fear, power, and the disregard for human rights. It is a narrative that continues to echo, a specter that haunts the corridors of power, a wound that is yet to fully heal. As the echoes grow fainter with the passage of time, it becomes even more imperative to keep the memory alive, to continue the quest for truth and accountability, and to ensure that such a system never finds a foothold again. The scars may fade, but the lessons must remain indelible, for in those lessons lie the keys to a more just, humane, and secure future. Thanks for listening. This has been the Dark History Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.